I've been talking for years, and definitely ever since I started this channel, on how the majority of the mainstream media is just an arm of the establishment Democratic Party and the intelligence agencies, and they're just a mouthpiece for them. They're not real journalists. And so it's no surprise we saw with the Russia collusion narrative that it was lies being spread for nearly 3 years by the media. Every day they were talking about a new bombshell. There was proof that there was Russia collusion. They're working tangentially and in conjunction with former CIA heads such as John Brennan, or for other former intel heads like Clapper, that are going on their network as news pundits, and they're just working to spread this power. I just did a video on Matt Taibbi. He was formerly of the Rolling Stone, a liberal journalist, who talked about, amongst other things, how the Russia collusion narrative destroys all the media's credibility. And one of the things he specifically says is how ridiculous it is that they work directly with these intel officials. They're supposed to speak truth to power, but instead they're doing the exact opposite. So as bad as all of this is, one of the reasons that you also hate the media is not just that they're acting as arms of the establishment Democratic Party, but the fact that they're so brazen about it that when they're caught in obvious lies, they just double down. They refuse to acknowledge it. They refuse to lie. We saw this with the Smollett case. We saw this with the Covington case. We saw this with the Kavanaugh case. We saw this, at least with the Iraq WMDs, they pretended to feign, oh, we won't be fooled again. We'll be critical of the intel agencies this time. Well, we see short 12, 13 years later, that's not the case at all. Not only are they not critical of the intel agencies, they're telling us to investigate them would actually be something that would damage the country in itself. And so I present to you some videos I'm going to be doing on media people and their reaction to finding out that there was no Russia collusion. Now, the most egregious example of someone peddling Russia conspiracy theories is easily Rachel Maddow. Every day, like, you could find videos of her saying Russia like 200 times in one hour show she does. She spread all sorts of conspiracy. She's literally just the definition of #resist. She doesn't care about being an independent journalist. All she cares is about spreading these lies, spreading the Russia narrative, and it's made her extremely wealthy and one of the most viewed people on cable television. So you would think, if you were Rachel Maddow and you had one shred of dignity left, that after finding out that the story that you've pushed for nearly 2 years, or over 2 years, I guess, breathlessly, every night, to the point where even leftists like Jimmy Dore have mocked you for how much of a conspiracy theorist you are. When you find out that the entire bones that you've made, that everything that you've made your name of was a lie, was based on a lie, anyone with any sort of integrity would say, my goodness, I'm a little sorry. Let's see if she does that. My point is, not only is it appalling that the media constantly does this thing, but they never have to apologize. So let's see what Rachel Maddow says. Here's the start of our show. And I'm going to be flipping through it because I don't want you to have to go through the misfortune of watching this entire thing. So here we go.
Hour. In 1974, Leon Jaworski was the special prosecutor who was investigating Watergate and related issues within the Nixon administration. The first special prosecutor, of course, had been Archibald Cox. President Nixon had to fire his way through the upper echelons of the Justice Department in order to fire Archibald Cox, the first special prosecutor, for him having the temerity to demand that the Nixon White House follow law and obey court orders and hand over material relevant to that investigation. So Cox got fired. Leon Jaworski was Archibald Cox's successor. And if the Nixon White House was hoping for somebody to be intimidated by how he got the job, if they were hoping for somebody more cowed, somebody who'd be less aggressive, somebody who might have felt at least implicitly threatened by the way Archibald Cox had been ousted on direct orders from the president, that was not what they got with Leon Jaworski. Leon Jaworski was just as rock-ribbed, just as straightforward.
Okay, so we're a minute in. It seems a little strange. The entire narrative she had for the past year, instead of opening talking about that, now that we have the fact that the Mueller report said that there was no collusion with anyone in Trump's team, no illegal crime conspiring with Russians, with the Russian government or anything like that. You think she'd be addressing that, right? But for some reason, we're having this speech about what was going on with Nixon and Watergate. Let's fast forward. So let's go. Let's see. Let's go 3 minutes ahead. Let's see what. Surely she'll be talking about no Russia collusion now, right?
52-page document. It was essentially a guide. A lot of people called it a roadmap to the hundreds of documents and multiple tape recordings that grand jury had obtained and reviewed and come to see as relevant to the president's potential criminal actions. They packed up all that evidence. They wrote up this terse document summarizing that evidence, giving Congress the salient information they thought Congress would need to be able to make a decision about what to do next. There were no recommendations. as to what Congress should do. There were no conclusions drawn as to whether or not the president had committed crimes. It was just the facts, just the factual record. And in the end, Congress did decide to use that roadmap of evidence collected by the grand jury.
So interesting. We're almost 4 minutes into our show. We're still talking about Nixon. Haven't mentioned one thing about the fact that her entire career taking off the way it did based on this story of Russia collusion was a lie. Still no mention of that. So let's fast forward a little. We're 3 minutes in. Let's go some further ahead here. Let's see what she has to say.
Jaworski, the special prosecutor, or his grand jury saying, hey, the president appears to be obstructing justice here. He knowingly lied about whether or not clemency was going to be used as a tool to try to cover up the Watergate break-in. They never spell it out like that. They just laid out the facts and how they knew those facts. That was just Jaworski and the grand jury saying, this is what we know about the president's behavior. Here is the documentation that proves it. You make the call as to what to do about this. And the you making the call in that case was Congress.
Okay, we're almost 7 minutes into our opening monologue of the first show after the fact that she's just found out that her entire show for the past 3 years has been spreading lies. She hasn't even addressed it, let alone apologized. Isn't this unusual? Now, if you can see what she's doing, she's going to focus on the obstruction part. I've watched this entire thing. I'm saving you the pain of having to watch it. So she goes on this diatribe for 7-8 minutes about how, oh, here's what happened. And I'll briefly sum it up for you. It turns out under Nixon, you had an investigator that came, looked at all the information, and instead of deciding whether or not to charge, there was grand jury information. And that grand jury information basically showed that Nixon blatantly lied, that he had committed a crime of obstruction of justice and things like that. And so, because the investigator couldn't necessarily charge Nixon with the crime because Nixon was the president, instead he went through the courts and enabled that grand jury testimony to be released to Congress. Congress then didn't release that to the press and decided, based on the review of that information, that they just filed for impeachment proceedings. And so basically her argument is, oh, it shouldn't have been up to Trump's Attorney General Barr to decide that there was no obstruction, no crime for obstruction. He should just have to release all of his findings, all of the grand jury testimony to the Congress and leave them decide. Now, she talks specifically several times in this about how, I know it's important for grand jury testimony to be private. I understand why that's important. But then she goes ahead and trashes all that by saying, but we need to leave Congress and everyone see all this grand jury testimony because they couldn't indict poor Trump, so we need to be able to see that. And basically what she's arguing is she wants to have dirt so she could lie and spin on her show like she has for 2 years about the Russia collusion narrative to try to say impeach, 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 impeach. Now, we'll talk about the obstruction, and I'm going to do videos specifically on that, but does this woman have no shame? She has lied to the American people more than any other media personality for over 2 years. She has told you flat out every night on her show that Trump and the people connected to him are Russian stooges. That our country has basically been sold out to Russia. He's under the thumb of Russia. She's ignored all of the evidence that shows this is contrary. Look at someone like Jimmy Dore or Aaron Maté that talked about how, for example, we know that Trump's been harsher on Russia than Obama and most presidents before him since Reagan. But she ignores all of that. She breathlessly talks about conspiracy theories of, oh, well, a Russian showed up the day Trump was doing his speech. A Russian flew into the country. That must prove something. Oh, a man on a Russian yacht showed up next to somewhere where Trump owns a boat. That must prove something. All these tax returns of Trump that I released. Here, let's read them. It's going to show some shadiness. And then, of course, that blew up in her face every day. On and on and on and on. And it's made her one of the most watched people in the media. If you had any credibility, and I knew she didn't, but for those of you that might have had any guess, yes, okay, you can spread the lie for 2 years. Maybe there's still some people that are like, okay, there's still a shred of hope for her. Surely anyone concerned about their professional work, if they were this wrong for so long, they would come out and say, I'm sorry. I was wrong about that. Even if she wants to talk about obstruction. She should have took this first segment after lying to the American public for 2 years to say, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm going to try to correct these mistakes. I'm going to try to do better in the future. Now, I still think that Trump maybe obstructed justice. We'll get on to talking about that. But when I told you for 2 years that Trump and people connected to him were agents of Russia, I lied. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry, and I hope you forgive me. And I hope that you could, continue to be able to trust me. For all the people that are trusting her and believe this. Now, would have I instantly forgiven her? No. What she did is so egregious, even if it doesn't mean she's intentionally corrupt, which I think she obviously is, But even if that was the case, it wasn't the case. She's so inept in her job to spew this for 2 years that as if there was evidence that she was seeing every day that showed Trump was a Russian stooge. And yet, Mueller says that's not the case. People make fun of Alex Jones. This is worse than Alex Jones. She actually is on the mainstream media. But she's not taking the time to do that. Instead, she's just talking about Nixon and trying to make some comparison and trying to make this all seem like, oh, Trump's still the bad guy and his Attorney General Barr's the bad guy. They won't leave people see the evidence, let alone that Trump specifically said that he doesn't mind if the whole thing becomes public. And Barr said he would do his best working with Mueller and Rosenstein and going through courts to see exactly how much information he would be able to release. But she's ignoring all that. She's just acting like, oh, here's Trump and his Attorney General, and they made the decision themselves, and I'm not even going to talk about the collusion part. We're just going to say that Trump's corrupt and his Attorney General's corrupt. So let's get to some more of this. I'm probably going to have to fast forward some more because she continues to go on and on and on about this point before she gets to anything relevant.
Leon Jaworski and that grand jury was not going to indict the president in a court of law. So they got permission from the court. It was Congress's decision what to do with the factual information that they had amassed. No recommendations from that grand jury and from the special prosecutor. No conclusions drawn, just the facts. That is our historical inheritance as a country.
Our historical inheritance, also things like McCarthyism and journalists lying about WMDs, journalists constantly lying on behalf of the establishment, warmongering people. Rachel Maddows proud to endorse that historical inheritance as well, correct? And let's not forget that we have new rules after the special prosecutor into Bill Clinton, which, by the way, I was against that special or independent counsel. I was against that as well. I don't care about Bill Clinton's sex life. I thought that special counsel or independent counsel, I'm sorry, I got to use the right term, exploded massively. So I was against that, but they actually instituted new rules because that investigation became so massive and strayed so far away from its original intent. So actually, Mueller was actually under more strict guidance. He wasn't an independent counsel, he was a special counsel. Prosecutors like this, it's long been the tradition that prosecutors aren't supposed to give evidence to make someone look bad if they've not recommended crimes. In other words, if a prosecutor charges you with some crime and then they ultimately can't find evidence that you committed the crime, they're not supposed to then go on television or go in front of other people and say, well, I couldn't charge him with a crime, but here's all the shady crap we found out. That's not supposed to happen. But that's exactly what she wants to happen here. The irony is this is the exact same thing she screamed so loud about Comey doing. That's what Comey did. Comey came out and said, okay, well, here's all the shady crap that Hillary did, but I'm not going to recommend charges. The difference is we know for a fact that Hillary did commit those crimes, and we now know, for example, that people at the FBI wanted to charge her, but Loretta Lynch, that supposedly recused herself, had her DOJ tell the FBI agents, no, don't even bother charging her, because if you request charges, we're not going to implement those charges anyways. But Maddow was appalled when Comey did that, but that's exactly what she's asking for Mueller to do in this case, or for Barr to do. Let's go on.
As a people, in terms of how we deal with presidential wrongdoing. And now, to celebrate the 45th anniversary of that on-the-nose historical precedent for an investigation into potential obstruction of justice by a sitting president of the United States. Now, 45 years later to the month, now this time, the Trump administration has decided they'd like to handle this one a little bit differently this time.
So we're at 6:07, so her show's been going on for over 7 minutes, and she finally gets to talking about part of the relevant information, talking about Donald Trump and the Mueller investigation. 7 minutes into our show, and she's just going to glide right over and I lied to you about collusion. It's just going to be all focused on obstruction, as I said in some of the live streams I did last night and earlier today on my friend Jerome Check's channel. So let's see what she has to say.
In a 4-page letter to the Judiciary Committees in the House and the Senate, newly appointed Attorney General William Barr has written a short narrative description of the content of the final report that has been prepared by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, a final report which no one outside the upper reaches of the Justice Department and the Special Counsel's office has apparently seen. In what Barr describes as an initial review of Mueller's report, he starts off by describing the reach and the effort put into Mueller's investigation. Quote, in completing his investigation, the special counsel employed 19 lawyers who are assisted by a team of approximately 40 FBI agents, intelligence analysts, forensic accountants, and other professional staff. The special counsel issued more than 2,800 subpoenas executed nearly 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records, issued almost 50 orders authorizing use of pen registers, made 13 requests to foreign governments for evidence, and interviewed approximately 500 witnesses. And
now, one of the things that would be nice to be in the mainstream or have some more money when doing kind of things, one of the things I can't do, I don't have the editing software to be able to do things as smoothly as they're doing, but really cool. They're able to bring up the actual bar letter and put the words on the screen. So surely she's going to then show all of the relevant words. So I'm sure she'll get to that part, you know, where she's going to focus heavily on the fact that Mueller specifically quoted as saying that there was no Russia conspiring between anyone in the Trump campaign or any American. Of course, she's not going to do that, as you know. Her point that she's going to make here is, yes, this is there was a massive amount of resources being used, and this shows that there was a lot of evidence. So therefore, why can't we all see the evidence on things related to obstruction? Now, I actually agree that I would like for people to see as much of this evidence as possible, but I do understand that Barr can't just on his own release that. Grand jury testimony, it is very important. It's a very strict law that says you have to go through a very stringent process to be able to go through courts before you're able to release that grand jury testimony. And that makes sense because grand juries are secretive. You don't want exactly what was going on in those grand jury testimonies to be released to the public because names will get smeared, all sorts of things that are going on that weren't supposed to be made public would be able to influence or would be shown to the public that would then smear people that didn't actually commit crimes. It also jeopardizes further grand jury testimonies because if you're someone who's testifying in front of a grand jury or you're a member of a grand jury yourself, you're afraid that your information is going to get out there in public, and so you're just going to say, nah, I don't want to cooperate. That's why these things are secretive. But that's not to say that there aren't there's not ways to get around being able to release this information. And Barr said he'll do just that. He's going to be working in conjunction with Mueller and Rod Rosenstein to be able to go through the courts to legally do what he can to release as much of this information as possible. Of course, like everyone else in the media, Maddow's not going to accept culpability like she should, being ashamed of herself for spreading this lie about Russia collusion for 2 years. She's not going to accept that. She's not going to do that and ask for your forgiveness. Instead, she's going to just focus on obstruction and now spin a new narrative, making it seem like, oh, Barr and Trump, they're just shady and they're not going to release any information to anyone. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening. But we'll go on.
Boy, that's a lot of numbers. Those certainly seem like an impressive list of numbers of things. It would be more substantively illuminating to the American public and to Congress if we knew anything about the products of those 2,800 subpoenas or what those 13 foreign governments turned over when they got requests for information.
It's funny, she seems to be trying to make the argument here, well, we shouldn't jump the gun. Now, I agree in principle on this, that I still want to see as much of the information as possible to myself. But two things to remember here. One, Rachel Maddow was one of the litany of cohorts of the majority of the media, mainstream media, that when Nunes wanted things like his memo released, when Trump threatened to declassify the FISA document into Carter Page, they all screamed, no, that'll destroy sources and methods. That would be obstruction of justice. You can't do that. That sort of transparency will hurt the FBI. It'll hurt people's faith in the investigative agencies. But they have no problem when it might be Trump that ends up looking a little bad from the information and saying, oh, now we need total transparency. So that's the first issue there. The second issue there is she's not really talking about how all of this information, she talks about how much information is here, but she's going to still somehow try to apply that this shows that, that doesn't mean that the collusion thing was over, that no stone was left unturned, which is ridiculous.
It would be more substantively helpful to know what kind of information was obtained from these 500 witnesses.
The other thing I wanted to say is, on the point of saying we should wait until we see evidence to make up our mind, that is antithetical to what Rachel Maddow led the charge for all the mainstream media doing, when they kept saying collusion, Trump's a Russian spy. They didn't wait to make up their mind then. Now when we actually have in Mueller's own words, who they told us was going to bring us the goods, was going to bring, show that Trump and people connected to him were Russian agents and under the thumb of Putin, and people would be drug out of the White House in handcuffs. When they told us all of this garbage, they didn't wait for the evidence then, did they? They just said, yeah, we know, and they spun conspiracy theories. Now when we have Mueller, the guy they told us was going to get to the bottom of it, definitively say there is no Russia collusion. There was no conspiring with anyone connected to the Trump campaign with Russians to help steal the election or anything like that. Now all of a sudden it's, oh wait, let's not accept those words from Mueller. Let's wait and we have to see all the evidence ourselves before we could jump to conclusions. Please, save me your sob story. Maybe someone who actually waited to reserve judgment the entire way through this, it would be a little more impressive if they said that, but not you, Rachel Maddow, who ought to be ashamed of yourself for lying to the American public for 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, you want to wait for evidence? Please.
But nevertheless, I think those free-floating numbers are up there at the top of the letter in order to make us feel assured that no stone was left unturned. Barr then describes what he says are the two parts of the special counsel's report. The first is the special counsel's investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
Okay, almost 10 minutes into our show. This part of the Barr statement is where it specifically says that there was no collusion. So Shirley, finally now, almost 10 minutes into our show, she's going to say, there was no collusion. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I'm ashamed of myself. Shirley, that's what you'll say, right?
From what Barr says in his short letter, it sounds like the actual Mueller report goes into quite a bit of detail about what Russia did to try to mess with our election and try to install their favored candidate in the White House.
There's not been any proof that that was expressly what was going on that's been shown. In fact, most of the intelligence agencies, if you're going to take them at their word, which I think a lot of them are incredibly shady, said that actually the number one goal of Russia was to sow division. So more than they just wanted Trump. Now, the evidence does so they probably preferred Trump to Hillary. But is that surprising? Hillary was basically calling for an all-out war against Russia. She wanted a no-fly zone over Syria, for example, which would have basically been an act of war. So no surprise, they would have probably preferred Trump. But all evidence suggests that they had plenty of progressive causes they were championing. For example, the Russian trolls were doing things like spreading Black Lives Matter messages, spreading LGBTQ messages. Those are certainly causes that are against Trump. After Trump was elected, they did things like they were responsible for holding rallies, apparently, that were against Trump and things of that nature. The number one goal, the intelligence agency said, was to do what these foreign countries always do, which is try to sow division and just meddle in our country as best they can, which makes sense. The United States does that to other countries as well. That's what rival countries do to each other. Humorously and ironically, the best division that the Russians were able to sow were apparently the Hillary Clinton paid for dossier that cited Kremlin officials that said that Trump campaign people did all this crap working with Russians. Well, it turned out that was all a lie. None of that could be proven. So the best division that they were able to do was to dupe the media and dupe the intel community. Though I don't even know that they were duped. They probably knew that it was lies, or they at least knew there was no proof of it. But then we had 2 years of constant, almost 3 years now, of constant Trump's a Russian stooge, Trump's a Russian stooge. Not just by the media, not just by the intel community, but by all the cultural institutions of power. So that'd be the media, academia, the entertainment industry, Silicon Valley, all the voices in the know, all the hip people that you could see on television, all the wealthy corporations that control these media networks, almost all of them were saying, oh yeah, Trump's a Russian stooge, all parroting this line. Now you tell me, if you were Russia and you wanted to create division, who did a better job creating division, Trump or the people that have been calling him a Russian stooge and stymieing his efforts to govern for 2 years? Clearly, the clearest way that Russia was able to influence was through dupes or intentional corrupt people like Rachel Maddow and her media cohorts that went on and told the American people that their duly elected president was an agent of Russia. That was the best division that occurred.
Barr then says, and he repeats himself for emphasis, he then says that, quote, the special counsel's investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in its efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. So that's the first part of the report. He quotes what he says is a sentence from Mueller's report that there was no finding that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia. That's the first part of the report. When it comes to the second part of the report...
That's it. That's what you get. That's what she has to say about being wrong about Russia collusion for 2 years. For every night in her show, saying that it was true, it was true, it was true. Mueller was going to find the goods. We know, we saw the evidence. Putting forth conspiracies. Russia, 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 Russia. The walls are closing in. The noose is tightening. Russia, 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 Russia. Not having anyone on counter to this narrative. Ignoring all evidence, just being a conspiracy theorist. For 2 years, she got incredibly wealthy, became one of the most watched people in cable news. And it's all a lie. And what she say about it, she gets to it 10 minutes in her show. She's like, yeah, apparently, Barr says that Mueller says there's no collusion. But that's just the first part. Let's get to the second part about obstruction. Now, before we get into all this about obstruction, just think about the chutzpah that it takes for Rachel Maddows to not only not apologize, but that's what she covered that. 10 seconds. That's the coverage that collusion gets tonight. Every other night, collusion got almost the entirety of her hour on television. But tonight it gets 10 seconds because she lied, because she was wrong, because her entire boost in ratings of becoming one of the most viewed people and making all this money as being a corporate shill and an establishment intel agency shill, it turned out to be a lie. She lied to the American people. So she just wants to brush out, oh, talk about that 10-second. Now let's talk about obstruction. So I just want you to remember that. That's the most important thing. But far be it from me to back away from any sort of debate and any sort of argument. So yeah, let's admit that Maddow, who has pushed this collusion more than anyone in the mainstream media, and that's why it's important to do this video, she's indicative of all of the people in the mainstream media that were pushing that. She's indicative of all of it. We see now that even her, that's going to be the tactic. We're just going to ignore it. So it's important to point that out and hold them accountable. This is how you know that the media is not going to change, that they haven't learned anything, and that they didn't just make innocent mistakes. They're liars. If it was just an innocent mistake, they would all be coming out begging for forgiveness, saying, we're sorry, we should have done our job better, it won't happen again. But they're not. They're making excuses for it, or they're ignoring it. So it's important to talk about that. But let's go. Let's talk about obstruction, right? So she's going to talk about all this stuff about obstruction, and I'll get to it specifically what it means. But remember this from the outset. What was Donald Trump obstructing? Supposedly, the argument for obstruction was, oh, he was worried about this investigation digging up the fact that he was an agent of Russia, or people connected to him were conspiring with Russia to help steal the election. Well, it turns out that crime didn't exist. So when you're talking about Richard Nixon and the idea, well, that's what she's going to keep going back to, what happened with Nixon, well, the idea of obstruction with him was there was an actual crime that was committed, and that crime was people in his orbit and people that were part of his campaign broke into his opposition's hotel and tried to steal documents from them. And then Nixon ended up trying to cover up that crime. There is no underlying crime that's any way connected to Trump in the 2016 election. None. That's the first part that she's brushing over here. There was no Russian collusion. The only people, now they'll say, oh, but there were people convicted of crimes. Yeah, none of them had anything to do with Trump. You had process crimes, people lying to the FBI and things like that. And you had the fact that Manafort basically committed crimes while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State with the Podesta group, you know, Hillary's campaign managers group. That's the big crime. So what did he have to obstruct over? It's just absurd. It doesn't make sense. But let's get to what she has to say.
When it comes to obstruction of justice, one of the things Barr appears to be vaguely hinting at here is that Mueller seems to have made some sort of detailed factual accounting of the president's actions that could potentially be construed as obstruction of justice. Barr says that Mueller made a, quote, thorough factual investigation into these matters related to obstruction of justice. He says, quote, for each of the relevant actions investigated, the report sets out evidence on both sides of the question and, quote, leaves unresolved what the special counsel views as difficult issues of law and fact concerning whether the president's actions and intent could be viewed as obstruction. More broadly, William Barr describes, quote, the special counsel's decision to describe the facts of his obstruction investigation without reaching any legal conclusion, which is something that has some echoes in history. Right? Factual information about the president's behavior as it relates to obstruction of justice.
She doesn't look that happy today. I just wanted to throw that out there. She's got this real hollow. I don't know that she's crying like she apparently was the other night when it first came out that there would be no indictments on Friday night, but doesn't seem very happy, does she?
No conclusions one way or the other as to the criminality of those actions. Just that detailed factual information handed over without recommendation, without drawing prosecutorial conclusions. That is what Leon Jaworski and his grand jury did on March 1st, 1974, in that document that was conveyed to the House Judiciary Committee. And we don't know exactly what Robert Mueller has done, because all we have is William Barr's short and somewhat opaque description of what he says Mueller has done. But what Barr seems to be indicating here is that he got a detailed, just the facts recounting of Trump's behavior that potentially pertains to criminal obstruction of justice. A recounting that, quote, does not conclude that the president committed a crime, but it also does not exonerate him.
Now, you keep hearing this exonerate term, but that's not what prosecutors do. Prosecutors don't exonerate you. Prosecutors see if there's enough evidence that you committed a crime. If so, they charge you for the crime. Then you get to defend yourself in a court of law, and they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed that crime. But they could charge you for the crime if they see evidence for it. Now, I know there's this argument of could the special prosecutor, could Mueller have actually prosecuted Trump for a crime because he's a sitting president? Well, Mueller, I think, we'll see. At some point, Mueller will explain himself. But from this conclusion, it doesn't seem Mueller said, I thought the evidence was there to prosecute him, but I didn't know if I had the legal bounds. He would have had full rights to say that if he wanted. There wouldn't be anything illegal about him saying that. But he clearly didn't say that. So this idea that, oh, he wasn't exonerated, so that shows something, it's just absurd. Like, what does that mean? Well, Hillary Clinton then, I guess, wasn't exonerated by the FBI. They just said we don't see enough evidence to charge him. That wasn't an exoneration. I don't remember Maddow saying, what? She wasn't exonerated. We need further investigations. Comey already said she did a bunch of shady stuff. It looks, man. And he didn't fully exonerate her. He just said that no prosecutor would charge. But that doesn't prove she didn't engage in unethical behavior. So we need more investigations to get to the bottom of it. No, they didn't say that at all, did they? And I'll get to more of the differences between the hypocrisy for people like Maddow and what happened with the FBI investigation of Hillary and what they're suggesting now. But let's go on for now.
And when that exact sort of document was handed over to the Judiciary Committee in the House by Leon Jaworski and the Watergate grand jury in 1974, the Judiciary Committee in 1974 looked at that factual record of information they had obtained from the grand jury and the special prosecutor, and they decided, in fact, that based on that information, they would draw up impeachment proceedings against President Nixon, primarily for obstruction of justice.
Okay, so then it sounds like what she's saying here, because if you follow the whole clip, I skipped through some of it, but she talks about she does understand the importance of grand juries and keeping them secretive, but she says what happened was that when this happened with Nixon, they gave it to the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee didn't leak to the press whatsoever, and they ultimately decided to start impeachment proceedings as a result of that. So I guess Maddow's suggesting that people like me and you and her shouldn't get access to this information. It should instead just go to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Or the House Judiciary Committee. Now, does she really think there's going to be enough votes to impeach Trump? Because that's the implication. With Nixon, it was so obvious, which is why the standard was that he did things to obstruct justice. For example, he was firing people and basically telling people not to look into this, and eventually they looked into it anyways. It turned out that he deleted tapes, etc. This, it's clearly not that cut and dry. So if it goes to the judiciary like she's suggesting, and there still wouldn't be enough votes for impeachment, would she be quiet about it then? Of course not. Then she'd say, well, don't we have the right to see this? So it's just garbage. She understands exactly what's going on, that there's a legal process, that Barr just can't release this.
This time, this factual record, this description of the president's behavior, it didn't go over to the House Judiciary Committee. Instead, they got a letter, because the actual information went instead to the president's newly appointed attorney general, who has been on the job for a month.
Okay, but it's been what, like 3 days? Mueller completed his report, what, Friday? So let's not act like there's not a chance that people in Congress won't get access to this information. She's just jumping the gun and assuming. Now remember, the people in the Judiciary Committee and Nixon didn't recommend criminal charges against Nixon. They just went with impeachment proceedings, which if you look into it, you don't have to have proof that you committed a crime. All it has to be is that there's the political will to think that you did something unethical that could be high crimes or misdemeanors. But you don't have to be charged with a crime officially to be able to be impeached. We saw that with Bill Clinton. So there's no reason, just because Barr said we're not going to have criminal prosecution of this, that's not a statement by Barr saying, oh, and by the way, no one even in Congress will get to see this information. She's just making this up, because she's trying to avoid from the fact that she's a liar and that her entire narrative of Russia collusion that she's peddled to you every night for 2 years is a lie. So they have to make up this hypothetical new boogeyman. Well, Barr's the bad guy now. And he's not going to leave anyone ever see any of the documents that Mueller released. And he's probably just lying about Mueller's documents. And somehow he has the goods on Mueller, so Mueller can't speak up and say, whoa, wait a minute, Barr totally misinterpreted what I said. That's what Maddow wants you to believe now. They're acting as if, Barr and Trump and all these other people said, oh, no one will ever see, we don't want anyone to ever see this information. When quite the opposite, Barr and even Trump saying, yeah, I don't care if the public sees it. It's up to Barr. He has to go through the legal proceedings. He can't just release grand jury testimony, but sure, I want the American public to see as much as possible. But Maddow's entire spiel here so far is operating under the lie that, oh, because we haven't seen this information within 3 days, then it shows Trump and his people are covering things up.
and who got the job after submitting to the White House an unsolicited 19-page memo which claimed that the president inherently can't obstruct justice, and Robert Mueller can't even investigate him for that.
Okay, well, Barr didn't stop Mueller's investigation, and who cares what Barr's opinion was? I don't seem to remember you having a problem when Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General for Barack Obama, who was in charge of many investigations into things like Obama's agencies and other allies of Barack Obama, when he claimed that he was, quote, Obama's wingman. I don't recall Rachel Maddow getting upset about that. Isn't that strange?
Whatever information Attorney General William Barr just received from Robert Mueller about the president's behavior as pertains to potential criminal obstruction of justice, Barr could have just passed that information onto the Judiciary Committee for them to decide what to do with it, following in Jaworski's footsteps.
Yeah, but the Judiciary wouldn't be able to make any recommendations for criminal recommendations of Trump. Only a prosecutor could do that. Politicians don't have the ability to do that. So why the Attorney General would have the ability to recommend filing charges and things like that. So why wasn't he able to do that part and then potentially in the future give the information over to Congress, including the Judiciary Committee? I don't think anyone's suggesting that members of Congress won't be able to see the bulk of the Mueller report. That seems absurd. I don't think anyone's suggesting that. There's a question of how much exactly of the grand jury testimony they could see. But Maddow seems to be saying just because because Barr made an initial judgment on the criminality of whether or not to bring charges against Trump, then that's somehow unethical. And keep in mind, she's using this Nixon example, and she's wrong. The Judiciary Committee did not recommend criminal prosecution against Nixon. It just voted to impeach. So her thing of, oh, well, Barr decided not to recommend charges. He should have did like they did in Nixon and hand the information over to the Judiciary. Okay, he still may. He just did the initial step of saying we're not going to recommend charges.
The handling of the Watergate roadmap in 1974. But instead, somewhat inexplicably, he decided to take it upon himself to declare definitively, yeah, I looked at all that stuff and I can tell you there's no crime there. It's fine. At which point, whatever you think about the quoted conclusions about the other half of Robert Mueller's report,
about the fact that I lied for 2 years and there was no Russia collusion, whatever you think about that, but we still think that, I'm still going to argue that Trump obstructed into an investigation of a crime that he never committed. That's literally their argument here. He did things like fire Comey that we all recommended. And Comey admitted that the investigation went on. And Rosenstein was the one who recommended firing Comey in the first place. Yet Rosenstein didn't have to recuse himself. Ironically, 7 days after recommending to fire Comey, Rosenstein then, under the auspices of, geez, it's weird that Trump followed my recommendation and fired Comey, I think I need to appoint a special counselor to look at that. I know, I'll appoint the very guy that Comey wanted me to, his mentor. Under the idea that Comey admitted the investigation went on, under the fact that we know there was no obstruction into Mueller's investigation despite Trump's tweets, none of that mattered. It didn't do anything terrible. The investigation went on and was able to finish without Trump intervening. And let's talk about the last thing that I want to mention about this. I love the fact that it's so strong on, having Barr, because he was appointed by Trump, that proves that he can't have a fair look into whether or not people connected to Trump committed crimes. I don't recall her saying that about Loretta Lynch. Again, I already went through Holder, but let's talk about what Lynch did. Lynch went a step further than anything Barr did. She was the one who ultimately was investigating Hillary Clinton would recommend charges or not. She met with Clinton's husband on a tarmac in secret that was only reported because a local journalist that wasn't someone like Maddow that's a shill actually saw this meeting occurring and spoke up about it. And so then we were told, well, it's cool, Lynch doesn't have to recuse herself still because Lynch came out and said, don't worry, whatever the FBI recommends, I'll follow through with it. I don't recall Maddow saying, this is outrageous. Lynch should have to recuse herself. She can't be impartial. Don't recall that at all. No, she was on the boat of, Lynch basically recused herself. She just listened to the FBI. Only we now know as a result of the testimony of people like Lisa Page that that's not true. Actually, there were many people in the FBI that wanted to recommend charges against Hillary Clinton. And people at Loretta Lynch's DOJ, Lynch, who said, I'll just listen to the FBI, the people under her at the DOJ told the FBI, don't even bother recommending charges because we're not going to charge because we think that our interpretation of the law is that they didn't commit a crime. I don't recall Maddow being upset about that. In fact, they'll later, all of her and her media cohorts are out there tonight going, oh, can you believe Trump said he wants investigations into the other side? He wants investigations into what the intel community was doing at the start of the Russia and the Hillary investigations. Oh, that's just terrible. He's weaponizing things now. So it's a complete double standard. So sorry if I don't take her at her word. The other thing is that she's not talking about here is she doesn't mention that Barr specifically talks about he's making these decisions about what to release, and he made the decision not to charge for obstruction in consultation with Rod Rosenstein, who's clearly not a Trump ally, who has been at Trump's throat for a year and a half now, who was the one that recommended the special prosecutor in the first place. She conveniently leaves that out of her entire diatribe here. And when it comes to releasing the information, not only is Barr working with Rosenstein, but he's also working with Mueller himself, he said, to see what could be released. But she completely ignores that. She acts like she's trying to spin this narrative. One, she's trying to make it seem like it's just all these decisions are being made exclusively by this guy that Trump just appointed, who's a hack, who's just going to bat for Trump, and so he's hiding things that are really in the report, which is a lie. And second, she's trying to act like he's doing that on his own, which is a lie. He's working with Rosenstein and Mueller. And third, she's totally skimming over the fact that her entire story, her narrative, which made her wealthy and gave her all these viewers every day for the past 2 years, and I know I keep bringing this up, but it's the most salient point, that she lied about Russia collusion. She did, if we believe the intel community, she did the bidding of Russia by fostering division in this country. She sought to kind of help the intel communities in the Obama administration engage in a coup, basically, of the president to stop him from being able to effectively governing and trying to get him out of office. When that blows up in her face and it turns out that that's been a lie for 2 years, she's just trying to, I got to make up this narrative about obstruction now.
This obstruction stuff, it's like, where did this come from? I mean, on what grounds are you saying that you have concluded there's no crime here? What facts did you consider about the president's behavior when arriving at that conclusion?
Now remember, again, they were upset when James Comey came out and said, here's why I arrived at my decision. They said, that's not what's supposed to happen. People like Comey, they're not supposed to do that. They should have just came out and said, we're doing charges or we're not doing charges. If they recommended not doing charges, you shouldn't go into all the evidence that you looked at. It wasn't enough to have a charge, and that cost Hillary the election. That was terrible. But now they're calling for exactly that. After they went on for, they demanded an investigation by the IG into Comey over this because he cost Hillary the election. Now that's exactly what they're calling for, the same thing to happen. So excuse me if I don't take them seriously.
Mueller did apparently provide a detailed factual description of the president's actions as they pertain to obstruction of justice, including some actions. But we apparently will not be allowed to see that material. And the Attorney General seems to be indicating that Congress won't be allowed to see it either. Only he gets it.
Where did he indicate that? She had the images up where she was showing things directly from the letter. I didn't see her put a little block up that Barr said, and Congress will not be able to see this material. In fact, I saw the opposite. I saw him saying he would be working with Rosenstein and Mueller to get this information disseminated to members of Congress and the people as much as possible. So she's just lying.
I mean, to the extent that Mueller amassed a factual record of the president's behavior, some of it will be stuff the president did in public that we could all read about in the paper.
Yes, and people like you have already said that's obstruction. Things like you said that he should fire James Comey, and then he did fire James Comey based on the recommendation of Rod Rosenstein, and people like you screamed, obstruction! Even though we know Comey admitted under testimony that the investigation was unimpeded and went on, even though we know the Mueller investigation then even picked up more steam, even though we know that Trump didn't do anything to stymie the Mueller investigation. Still, she's going to scream obstruction based on that publicly available info. So, of course, whatever secretive stuff she didn't get to see, let me guess, her conclusion will be, yep, that's obstruction too. Just like her collusion was, yep, I see proof of collusion. I see proof that people connected to Russia are colluding and conspiring with Russians to steal the 2016 election. She came up with that decision, right? She came up with that line, spread it to the American people for 2 years. See, this is why things like the grand jury testimony are supposed to be secret. And again, I still want to see as much of it be public as possible. But part of the reason it has to be secret is because they know scumbags like Rachel Maddow will take information that she knows she could spin to say, this is proof of a crime, and then never-endingly cast doubt on people that there is no evidence to charge for a crime as criminals. That's what she did with the Russia collusion narrative. That's what they want to do with things like the tax returns. That's why Trump won't release the tax returns. All they need to see is, oh, what's this? Trump had a business in Russia? That's it. Proves he's a Russian stooge. There we go. End of discussion. Doesn't matter if there's an actual 2-year special investigator that they told us would get to the bottom of all this, that would lead people out in handcuffs, that ultimately decided there are no criminal charges. That doesn't matter. They know better. Bill Maher said it the other night. He doesn't need to see what Mueller said. He knows Trump's a traitor because he has a television. That's how these people operate. It's conspiracy theories. Stop listening to them. It's garbage. There is no proof of Russia collusion. What was Trump obstructing if he was innocent in the first place?
But other stuff, especially stuff that wasn't publicly reported, he presumably would have pursued through the grand jury process. Right? Those 2,800 subpoenas, in large part, those were likely subpoenas to provide evidence and information to the grand jury. There were interviews with hundreds of witnesses. And some of those witnesses may have been directly interviewed by the special counsel's office, and that's it. But witnesses were also brought, a lot of witnesses were also brought before the grand jury. Attorney General William Barr now says at the end of his short letter to the Judiciary Committees that while he would love to convey Robert Mueller's confidential report in its entirety to Congress, and he is, quote, mindful of the public interest in this matter, oh, sad trombone, he can't, because he needs to remove all grand jury material from the report before he allows anybody else to see any of it, including the Judiciary Committees in Congress.
Yeah, that's the law. He also says that he's going to be working with Mueller and Rosenstein. They don't put this section up there. He'll be working with Mueller and Rosenstein, going through courts and doing the legal process to see what he could get basically unredacted so he could show members of Congress and members of the public. But she just ignores that. She ignores that part's in his letter. She acts like Rosenstein and Mueller have nothing to do with it, which is a lie. And she acts like that he's somehow, just by following this law, well, that's it. He's following the law, so he's clearly corrupt. The law's there. Is she arguing that Rule 6E doesn't exist? Of course it's there. He just has to go through a procedure going through the courts, which he talks about he's going to be doing with Rosenstein and Mueller as quickly as possible. By the way, that's what they did in the Nixon era also. It wasn't like they just said in the Nixon era, well, this information's so damning that screw the laws that we have on the book. We'll just release everything anyways. No, that's not what happened. They had to go through court proceedings to be able to have an exception. That's exactly what Barr is saying he's going to do here, with Rosenstein and with Mueller. But that doesn't fit Rachel Maddow's narrative, where she has to again lie. Trust her this time. She lied to you for the past 2 years, but this time, trust her.
And again, grand jury information rightfully is kept secret, but it is kept secret for a reason, which is that grand juries collect information for the purpose of considering criminal indictments against criminal suspects. When a grand jury has collected information against the one person in the country who can't be indicted as a criminal suspect because of his job, because he's the president, well, does that grand jury information about the president just go into a burn box somewhere?
One, there's an argument as to whether or not that a president can be charged. It's funny because they were arguing against this all the while. This was an argument people connected to Trump would make. Well, you can't charge a sitting president anyways. And tons of people, Democrat establishment people, were saying, that's not true. The Constitution's not directly clear on that. There might be ways to charge him. So her argument that, oh, now all of a sudden she's on the Trump side of this. Oh, he could have never been charged anyways. No, that's ridiculous. Second, that testimony, once Trump's out of president, the grand jury testimony, if there was evidence of a crime, then could be used, as long as it's within the statute of limitations, to be able to charge Trump with that crime. If that information is made public, then the whole investigation is ruined. You can no longer use that evidence to charge Trump of a crime if it was supposed to be secretive. So you've given up on that. So eventually he could have been charged with a crime. Third, that's not the only reason that grand jury testimony is secret. It's not just because it may be used to charge people with a crime. It's also because you keep information secret because you don't want to smear public official or people in the public eye for things that might be shady or unethical or that you might not like, but didn't amount to enough evidence to charge for a crime. That's the entire purpose. Again, this is what they flipped out over Comey doing to Hillary Clinton. But now they're saying that's exactly what they want done to Trump. Also, keep in mind, you might be saying, well, then turnabout's fair play. No, it's not. I've argued against turnabout being fair play in ways that would benefit Trump. For example, I've said, based on what people like Maddow have said is acceptable, Trump would be able to pay for unverified opposition research rumors into all of his Democratic opponents, saying they pee on each other or something, and they're all agents of China, and then use his intel agencies to spy on all of them. That's what they've legitimized. I said that I'll speak up against that, and I will. Just because I voted for Trump doesn't mean that I want him to abuse these powers anyways. I've also spoke out against things like using the executive authority to put up a border wall, which you may agree or disagree with me on. But nonetheless, the point is, I'm not one who says turnabout's fair play if it benefits my side. But it's even different because with the Comey situation, we knew that there were actual crimes that were committed. We could see the evidence in public. It was just that they were given immunity for these crimes. So, for example, we know Mills and Abedin lied to the FBI, but were given immunity. We know that Hillary Clinton probably lied to the FBI about saying the C was alphabetical order and not classified. We know that people destroyed subpoenaed evidence on Hillary's team. So we knew all those crimes were committed. Comey then had to explain why, despite all of that, there wouldn't be a charge. He admitted that one of the reasons he did this was he assumed Hillary Clinton would win the presidency, and he didn't want this to be an albatross around her neck right as she entered the presidency. So he figured, hey, I'll just come clean and say, yeah, there was some shady stuff that went on, but we're not going to charge her, and then Hillary will win and it'll all be done. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for them. But funny, despite all that extra stuff, we see Rachel Maddow, the same thing that she and all the other Democrats screamed about Comey doing is exactly what they want Mueller to do now to Trump, or Barr to do to Trump.
Or does it go in confidence to an entity that can pursue justice and accountability for known criminal acts, even when an indictment can be brought? I mean, Jaworski and the grand jury conveyed their information in secret, under seal, to the Judiciary Committee in 1974. This information, obtained by Mueller's report, apparently just goes to President Trump's appointee. And other than that, he's going to make sure nobody else sees it.
Where does he say that? She's just lying. He doesn't say that at all.
The surprise in William Barr's letter.
Sounded like her voice was cracking a little there, didn't it? Not having a good day.
This weekend about Mueller's findings. The big surprise was this.
The big surprise was that you lied for 2 years, that there was no Russia collusion, right? That's what she's about to say?
Strange assertion, a legitimately unexpected assertion about Robert Mueller, the special counsel, choosing to, quote, not make a traditional...
No, that wasn't the big story. The big story was there was no Russia collusion, that you're a liar, that you led the charge of being a liar and creating division in this country. You led the charge of being a mouthpiece for the Obama administration and his intel agencies. You're a journalist that's supposed to speak truth to power and stop things like corruption, but instead you lied for 2 years and on behalf of the powerful, on behalf of the intel agencies. You lied for them on behalf of them for 2 years. And Mueller came out and said, no, you're wrong. This whole story was a lie. That was the big story. But yeah, you go ahead and pretend the big story was that Mueller didn't really decide one way or another to charge Trump with obstruction. Yeah, okay.
Prosecutorial judgment as to whether or not the president committed crimes related to the obstruction of justice. And that looms the largest in all of the questions raised by William Barr's report.
No, it doesn't loom the largest. Especially you, right? You specifically. When we're talking about what question looms the largest for you, it should be, oh, everything I've said for 2 years is a lie. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I was the most wrong person in all of the media. That's what looms largest. She's totally avoiding it. Now, the next section here, she puts up one by one. She goes through these questions that she has about the Barr report. I'm just going to skip to an image. And by all means, if you would like to watch the whole video, please do so. But here's an image of these questions. And we'll just look at the questions real quick. And then this will be the end of my video. But that just further buttresses the point that was being made was all of these questions. She has 15 questions about the Barr report. Now, I want you to look through 1 through 15 here. If hopefully you could read them. Not a single one of these questions have anything to do about Russia collusion. Not one. It's all about obstruction. And then questions like, will the information be released? Will Mueller testify? Will we get to see the evidence? You know, look at question 14. Will ongoing investigations be affected? Now, we were told when it came to releasing information about the FISA documents and possible corruption of the FBI using paid Hillary opposition research to spy on people connected to Trump's campaign, people like Maddow told us, oh, you can't release that information because it jeopardizes lives at the FBI, it jeopardizes sources and methods, and it would, if Trump does that, it will be an obstruction of justice because that would affect future investigations. Now, here she spent the entire video telling you, oh, well, we need to have all this information released to Congress and to the public. It needs to all be declassified so we can all see it, or it's horribly corrupt. And then question 14, will ongoing investigations be affected? Well, wait a minute, Miss Maddow. Didn't you and your cohorts just tell us 6 months ago that we can't release any information, we can't redact anything, we can't do anything with classified info because there's ongoing investigations? Now you're saying, oh, well, despite ongoing investigations, this should be released. If it does get released and then somehow it affects, for example, the Southern District of New York investigation that this stuff was released, and it affects it in a negative way, Maddow, who called for Barr to release this, will then be saying, oh, Barr and Trump committed obstruction of justice, so they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, by her own questions. She's a liar. Now you might say, why did you spend so much time on this? And I'll be spending time on other media people as well, because it's time that we hold these people accountable. And if it means that people like me, that are just random Joe Schmoes, has to watch these stupid shows and be able to show you just how bad they're lying, then so be it. But it's time that people start to hold them accountable. She lied for 2 years. This was her chance to, maybe things will get, it was just like after the Covington situation, or after the Kavanaugh, or after the Smollett. People were like, well, maybe this is a chance for the media to kind of take note of where they went wrong and make sure things don't happen again. And I just laugh at that. But here we go again. Well, maybe the ringleader of all this, not the ringleader, but the person that was up front and the most vocal about Russia collusion, maybe, just maybe, she'll have, the temerity to say, I'm sorry for that. I knew she wouldn't, but it was fun to watch and see she didn't say it. But what's even more funny about the whole thing is, not only did she not apologize, she could have at least had the damn nerve to sit here and say, well, here's why I think that collusion still did happen. Here's why I'm going to defend my reporting for the past 2 years. She didn't even do that. She's just like, oh, yeah, he said no collusion and obstruction, and made up this narrative as if Trump and Barr are going to keep anyone from ever seeing any documents whatsoever, which is a lie. That's not what they're saying. And she ignores that Rosenstein and Mueller are working in this. And she ignores that the law says this is exactly what they have to do. Nope, she has to just construct a new narrative, a new conspiracy theory, a new boogeyman, instead of addressing the conspiracy theory she just had. And guess what? When that conspiracy theory is proven wrong, then she'll just move on to the next thing. Then it'll be tax returns. And if that's proven wrong, well, that's okay. Then it'll be Stormy Daniel. And if that's proven wrong, it's okay. Something new will come up. Trump ate 2 scoops of ice cream or something. It's ridiculous. And it's worth pointing out how incredibly shady is. She was one of the people at the forefront of this, and I'll be routinely trying to look into videos she does in the past. I know this was a long video, and I know it might be difficult to watch the whole way through, but I wanted to give her a fair shake. Now look at this. It's 6:26 in this video. That's almost half of her show. This is what you've received so far. She has guests on the rest of the show, and, they're all like, yeah, obstruction. That's about it. But you see, I encourage you, watch the video yourself. I'm not misrepresenting her. Just more lies, more conspiracy theories. Can we finally stop pretending that these people are journalists, that these people are credible? And if you're watching my video, you're probably saying, the video died there, but that's okay. If you're watching my video, you're probably saying, yeah, we knew this already. But do you know how many people don't? Do you know how many millions of viewers she gets every night? 52% of people in a Fox News poll still think that Trump, what was it that they thought? They still think that vote tallies were changed by Russia. Or they think there's proof of collusion. That's absurd. There's no proof of it whatsoever. So, yeah, I'll be putting out more material throughout the week. If you like this video, please, I encourage you to like and subscribe. Click the alert button. Please recommend to me some other people. I'll be doing some more videos like this. Most of them won't be this long, but I really wanted to go through and give her the possible benefit of the doubt of going through the whole video and seeing if she ever did get around to apologizing or addressing the Russia collusion thing, which she didn't. So, again, like and subscribe if you like it. Recommend. I'll be putting out more videos, and thanks a lot for watching. Have a good one.